Hey there, everybody. I just want to say thanks up front for joining today's webinar entitled, But Really, Are You Taking Full Advantage of Your Service Catalog? I'll just mention real quick that today's session is being recorded, so if you need to jump off early, recording will be available on our website sometime early next week. Here's a look at today's presenter, Michael Hale. He's actually coming around a second time to present on service catalog best practices. He actually joined us and kicked off this service catalog webinar series about a month ago, again, talking about service catalog best practices. So if you missed that first webinar from last month, you can find a recording of it on our website, fruitionpartners.com. It's under the webinar section, which you can find under the resources menu. So last slide for me before I pass things off to Michael. Webinar participation. If you've joined us for a webinar in the past, we keep it open-ended. We really don't have a designated Q&A at the end, so if you have a question at any time, go ahead and enter it in that question box. I'll be keeping a close eye on that, and when we have an opportunity to interrupt Michael, I'll go ahead and present your question to him, and we'll get you an answer. You also have another option, though, for submitting comments and questions. That's via social, specifically with Twitter. So if you have your phone handy and prefer to do social, you can also tweet at us at Fruition Partner, and you can use that hashtag up on the screen, ServiceCat. So that's it for me. I'm going to go ahead and pass things off to Michael, just so everybody knows. I know we had this originally scheduled to be 30 minutes, but in talking with Michael, I believe we probably have about 15 to 20 minutes of content. So either we'll give you some time back in your day, or that's extra time is a good opportunity to do some Q&A at the end too, if there's any questions. So it's something to keep in mind. So I'm going to change presenter to Michael, and we'll kick off the demo. Thanks, Michael.
Yep. All right. Let me get to the right screen here. All right, y'all should be looking at my SOAP UI screen. Mike, can you see that?
Yep, we can see it. Thanks.
All right. So for the purposes of this webinar, what we're going to be doing, the last webinar I talked about using Service Catalog. Some of the different things that you can do with it, that Service Catalog is not just for requests. You can have record producers and a myriad of other things in it. And we also talked about the different things that you can do inside of your Service Catalog, your basic workflows, your order guides, or your execution plans, and where they all have their place, the pros and cons of each, right? And then the third thing we talked about in that webinar was how to integrate different things or different forms inside of ServiceNow to that. How to create a user in the HR module and have it auto-populate all of these things inside of an order guide without you having to do that manually. So we talked through those pieces. And at the end of that, we talked about what else you can do with Service Catalog and take that outside of ServiceNow, how you can do further integrations with the tool. And that's what we're talking about here today. I know one of the things that we talked about was around the SCCM, and that was one thing that I was not able to demo. I broke our SCCM environment, but what I do have for you is the orchestration piece of it. So on my screen here, I'm using SOAP UI, and I'm pretending that I'm PeopleSoft. I know a lot of people out there have PeopleSoft. So I'm pretending that I'm PeopleSoft, sending information of new users over to ServiceNow. Now this, I'm using PeopleSoft because that's one that I know a lot of people use, but it could be anything. It could even be a scheduled database load if you would like. But I'm sending it over a few pieces of information, right? The employee number, the first name, the last name, and a title, and then the manager. So let me send that information over. All right. So now that that information is sitting inside my ServiceNow environment, we can see here, I go to the users table. Here's the new user I just sent in, webinar 11, right? So we can see here that it populated this user, the manager, the employee number, and we have a thing here called provisioning profile number. This is something special that we've created to help with this onboarding process. Now, the provisioning profile number takes into account the person's department and their title and tells Active Directory which groups this person needs to be added to. Right? So now we're starting to fully automate and some of the more manual pieces. In order to do this, there definitely needs to be command and control around your environment and who goes where, and have a clear line of at least the base things that people need. But with this orchestration, with this provisioning profile master, we're using it here for purposes of this demo of strictly the orchestration AD groups. But it could go much further. You can, we have customers where we have this set up where not only does it tell you which AD groups you need, it also tells you what peripherals you need. If you need a laptop or a desktop, what systems you need access to, right? Certain titles, certain departments need access to certain pieces of information in the database. So it starts provisioning and setting up tasks to provision all of those things. Right? So like I said, for the purposes of this demo, we're using it strictly for the orchestration and the AD part of it, but it has so many more capabilities. Right? So the next place I want to take you is to the catalog item. So as we talked about this thing in the last one, we've integrated it. User came in from PeopleSoft into the user table. What it did here was it created a request automatically to say, hey, we need to onboard this person. So new user onboarding. Right, so it created the request to get this person onboarded. So we'll walk through. Since we've created the user first, we have a people picker, so we can actually go back and see more information on this particular user, right? So that's a very important piece of it there, is that we're creating the user first, and then we're drawing that information into our service catalog. Nate Anderson, who's also on the call here, he built this entire thing for the purposes of this demo. He's one of our integration experts here at Fruition, and he's done some really nice things. What you can see here is that here's the output of the integration piece. So here's the output of the workflow. We've created this user. We've added them to all the groups based on our provisioning profile, right? And I want to walk y'all and show you the workflow that actually drove this entire process, right? Because one thing I did, and before I do that, let me see here if I can refresh this. Because I want to show you that it did create that user. And then I have to go back out and back into it again.
Hey, Michael, can you hear me? This is Nate.
Yeah, I can.
For the LDAP piece, that's going to be pre-filtered to a place where the user didn't get created at. So clear the RDN that's up there and just hit the filter button.
Okay.
And that should bring it back.
I'm on ServiceNow.
Nope, that didn't find him either. Back out of that one and just go to the top level.
Go to the base one where I was at before.
Yeah.
So while that's loading up my user table, I want to walk you through the workflows behind it that drove this process. So as you can see, this workflow is actually, I would, on the surface, looks very simple, but we're running PowerShell within it. Right, so you can see the PowerShell that made all this happen. We talked about in the last webinar, we talked about some of the best practices around it. One of the best practices, and it's not documented on any website, but it's just good common practice. The first thing you should do inside of your workflow is gather all of your variables that you're going to be using, as many as possible. Right? There's some of them that you're going to actually have to run code to get, but grab all the variables that you know you're going to be using up front. Even if you set them to null strings, grab them up front and declare them. In the workflow, in the PowerShell section of this, this is where we're utilizing all those variables. For those of y'all who are familiar with PowerShell, you can see we're declaring the PowerShell variable, we're importing the Active Directory modules, and now we're walking through this process of creating the users and adding them to groups. Right. So, like I said, on the surface, this thing looks very, very straightforward, but there is some code going on behind the scenes there. Let's make sure this is open. And users. So as you saw in the test, I sent it over the webinar test 11 user. It did create the user in our Active Directory, and now we're going to pull up all that user's attributes. So you can see it did create the user in our Active Directory. I set myself as that user's manager, and here's all the groups, right? So we populated some of the more baser items. You know, you definitely have the ability to populate the password, to set password expires, the expiration dates on the account, and then as I said before, you have the ability to go beyond the Active Directory piece of it and actually start provisioning the user's peripherals, sending out tasks to get laptops or desktops, sending out tasks to get access to certain systems, cell phones. So you have the ability to do that. Another thing that I know Nate has built for customers is a queue. So when a user is created in the system, what it does is creates a queue that allows the manager to decide when that user starts getting provision, right? If I know I've already hired someone, but they're not going to start for a month, I don't need to start ordering these things right away. I have time. So there's definitely different ways to use your service catalog and the integration pieces of it, right? So yeah, that's really all I wanted to show y'all today is how we use orchestration to drive that onboarding, and then you can also do offboarding with this as well. One of the things to really understand about this is that even though I used PeopleSoft as the catalyst, is you don't have to. You know, we built these catalog items so that I could request an onboarding myself right from ServiceNow. If there's a user that was created, I could just go create an onboarding for any one of these users that I want, right? So without having to go the PeopleSoft route, but the PeopleSoft route is the more automated way, but you could go in and manually do those things if you wanted. Another thing of note is you can also add users to AD groups manually if you want it. Obviously, PeopleSoft is that automated way of getting it done, but if there's a one-off group that you needed to add someone to, you could definitely go that route as well, right? Because it wasn't in their provisioning profile. We all know that the provisioning profile would be set up for the baser things, but there are some of the one-offs that this person might need to do that's not part of the base job description. So you can add those things and know that it will update Active Directory accordingly. So that is my spiel. I got it done right in just over 15 minutes, which was my target time. Is there any questions that myself or Nate can answer?
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for doing the demo today. As mentioned earlier, we obviously have some extra time, and we like to do these kind of short little demo webinars because we understand everybody has more pressing things to get back to at the office. So, but I will say that now is a good opportunity to ask your questions if you have any. Michael, you can leave your instance up for a little bit. I don't know if anybody out there wants to see, Michael drive through anything else while in this instance related to orchestration or service catalog. So go ahead and make that request if you'd like. It looks like we actually do have a question that came in from Victoria. Thank you, Victoria, for your participation. Nate and Michael, a question for both of you. For offboarding, I assume the deprovisioning profile will have to be created. Is that correct?
So that's in a offboarding scenario, not really. Basically, when you're offboarding somebody, you'll have some predefined stuff that you're going to want to get rid of. But the really key thing when you're offboarding someone um, is to make sure their AD account gets disabled so they can't log in, cover the security side of it. Ideally, though, if they were created from a profile, we could go look back through that profile and make sure all the manual things that might need to be accounted for get created. So if they had, equipment assigned to them and that was part of their profile, we could go back and look through and see, okay, they have equipment, oh, it's assigned to them, hand out tasks to people to go pick up that equipment or whatever the actions might be. So I wouldn't necessarily say there would be a deprovisioning profile. We would just repurpose or reuse that provisioning profile to identify the stuff that we might need to go do for them. But a lot of the cases, and at least in the past for me, when I've done deprovisioning, it's, disable their account, get rid of all their groups, clean up their mailbox, and then also, clean up their personal drive and stuff like that. So it just depends on, exactly what criteria you want, but could use the provisioning profile to facilitate any of the manual stuff we need to do.
Great. Thanks, Nate. And if anybody has, any follow-up questions, feel free to contact us after the webinar. We'll share our contact info in a little bit on the last slide we have. So, but yeah, again, I would encourage folks if you'd like to see anything else while Michael has the instance up, let us know. Otherwise, we'll move to the closeout slide here in a minute.
Yeah, and also I want to apologize again about the SCCM automation. Like I said, we broke our environment here, but I do want to make sure that I note that in Geneva, ServiceNow has built in a lot of that functionality. They've done some really cool things inside of Geneva. So if you get the chance to read up on that, I would highly recommend it. They've enabled the ability to do software deployment, which is fantastic, natively inside of ServiceNow, which is where normally we would have to write code and things to make that happen. But they built that natively into ServiceNow, so that's a really nice feature right off the bat. So I would, like I said, I would definitely recommend that you go read that if you get the opportunity to see what's coming in Geneva.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michael. I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen, the final slide. Hopefully everybody can see it. So as I did mention earlier, a lot of times questions seem to come to mind after the fact. So if a question does come to mind after we shut down the webinar today, feel free to send us an email at info@fruitionpartners.com. I'm sure Michael will be more than happy, or Nate, to get into a more in-depth conversation around today's topic. If you're looking for possibly even more detailed conversation around what we talked about today or anything else in the field of ServiceNow or service management, and if you have 60 minutes to spare, we also encourage you to check out our Ask a Fru service. Again, this is a free consultation, 60 minutes for anybody looking to learn more about service management, ServiceNow. If you want to share your ideas, if you just kind of want to have a brainstorm session, we're here to help out. So you can find more details on that on our website, fruitionpartners.com. So I'm going to check the question box one last time. It looks like no more questions today, so we'll go ahead and shut things down. We appreciate everybody joining us today. And again, a recording will be available sometime early next week. So Michael and Nate, thanks to you guys for presenting, and thanks to all the folks out there who joined us today. We hope to see you on the next webinar. Thanks, guys.